Hello and welcome. Let's start with the Gen Z protests in Morocco, which have escalated rapidly. The violent anti-government demonstrations have turned deadly. At least 2 people were killed in clashes with the security forces on Wednesday. The incident took place near the coastal city of Agadir. Reportedly, police opened fire at a group of people attempting to storm a police station. The group reportedly attempted to seize service weapons. Now, during the police firing, 2 members of the group died of gunshot wounds and others were injured. The officials said that they were forced to fire at protesters in self-defense. Violence also spread to Saleh, which is near the capital of Rabat, where groups of young men hurled stones at police, looted shops and set banks ablaze and torched police vehicles. Hundreds of protesters also took to the streets across several other cities, including the capital of Rabat, Casablanca, Tangier and Tetoun. As violence flares, young protesters have called for the Prime Minister's resignation.
Young people are demanding schools and hospitals. What they are asking for is not impossible. These are necessities in Morocco. How can the authorities not understand this? Where is the government in all this?
Wer ist Akanuch? Hudos noting batok?
Young people have demands that are vital for Morocco, particularly in terms of hospitals and schools.
The protests that broke out last week, with demands for better education and healthcare, turned violent on Tuesday. As per Morocco's Interior Ministry, the clashes involved protesters using knives, Molotov cocktails and stones. The Interior Ministry said that since the protests began last week, over 400 people have been arrested and nearly 300 have been injured during the rallies. Authorities said that over 140 police vehicles and 20 private cars were also damaged. The protests have been organized by a group named Gen Z 212 via TikTok and Discord. In a social media post, the group expressed regret over Tuesday's violence and asked demonstrators to remain peaceful. The youth-led protests that have descended into chaos and violence are the biggest to hit Morocco in years. Now, these protests mirror the Gen Z demonstrations in Nepal, Indonesia, Kenya and Nigeria. Young Moroccans have been angry over corruption and the dire state of education and healthcare sectors. Protesters have slammed the government for pouring billions into international sporting events while neglecting the basic needs of the people. The North African nation is set to host the 2030 FIFA World Cup and also the Africa Cup of Nations later this year. Protesters have slammed the government for building and expanding stadiums instead of focusing on improvement of education and healthcare services.
We don't want football or anything else. If football had been good for us, it would have been introduced long ago and would have benefited young people. We want health. Our parents are suffering.
Young Moroccans have been repeatedly asking a single question, and that is, stadiums are here, but where are the hospitals? Now, for more on this, we have with us Issam Toutet, a journalist joining us live from Rabat, Morocco. Welcome to Firstpost Africa.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the Gen Z protesters have contrasted Morocco's heavy investment in World Cup preparations with the poor state of public health and education. To what extent do you think this disconnect between government spending priorities and basic public services has fueled these protests?
Well, first of all, it's not a spending disbalance, but it's like these young protesters. They started the protest, calling for a balanced or eradication of corruption from the health sector and the education sector. Of course, these young like Gen Z have never been against investing in sports, because these same people were
Yes.
the ones who walked down the street during the World Cup when Morocco made a breakthrough in the history of football. They have been always proud of the development in infrastructures. I mean, sport or football infrastructure. What they are calling for is the eradication of corruption from those two vital sectors and accountability for how the money or the budget allocated for those vital sectors is being spent.
Absolutely. And with casualties and hundreds arrested, and of course the growing calls for Prime Minister Akhnouch to step down, how do you assess the Moroccan government's ability to contain this movement without further escalation?
So, first of all, I have to make something clear. The young protesters have never called for a political reform, but instead they called for economic and social reform in the two vital sectors. I mean, education and health. So we
Healthcare.
don't hear about people protesters calling for Mr. Akhnouch to step down from the government, but what is happening now is something that the Gen Z 212 have distanced itself from. So they had like really basic demands for reform that should be happening in the most vital sectors to like ensure the dignity of the citizens.
Right. Right. And the protesters in Morocco it has descended into violence and chaos. And these protests have shown no sign of slowing down. What do these protests tell us about the broader trend of youth-led demonstrations that are gaining momentum across Africa?
So generally, this protest started in a peaceful way, but the government's response made some, like I wouldn't say protesters, but some parasite noises to get into the protests, and like things got out of control. So it all depended on the response of the government. I mean, on the broader
Right.
scheme, this has nothing to do with the escalation that is happening in other African countries where the army is down in the streets.
Right. Thank you very much for being with us on First Post Africa.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.
Firstpost now available in 9 languages on YouTube. English,
$36 trillion.
French,
Le FMI, comme
German,
Geschäftsführenden Direktor
Hindi,
$30 trillion kakarjo.
Indonesian,
Pemerintah tanpa pemeriksaan.
Italian,
Sekali radikali.
Japanese,
4 dolar以上mo.
Portuguese,
Por causa do próprio balanço patrimonial.
Spanish.
Beautiful bill.
Go to Settings, click on Audio Track and select a language of your choice. Be the first to know what's happening around you in your first language. Firstpost.